Hello, my name is Anna Young and I'm going to be presenting on our work looking at the risk behaviours associated with dating and relationship violence among 11 to 16-year-olds in Wales. So although I'm presenting on this, the work was mostly conducted by one of our colleagues, Danielle, who is now working for Welsh Government. So I don't want to take credit for all of her hard work, so just to make sure that she is acknowledged there. But we really wanted to share these research findings with you. So what is the presentation going to cover? I'm going to look at what we already know about dating and relationship violence among young people, what we did to explore the relationship between risk behaviours and dating and relationship violence, what we found out, what issues are important to consider, especially when interpreting the data, and what this means for schools moving forward. So in terms of what we know already about dating and relationship violence, well, certainly domestic violence encompasses emotional, financial, sexual, psychological and physical abuse. But the legal definition the UK government use doesn't apply to young people under the age of 16. So this is problematic because it doesn't acknowledge that, these forms of abuse take place are an issue for young people. And there's a growing body of literature and evidence that suggests that these things are happening, for children and young people. So, the term domestic abuse in itself can be a bit problematic because it implies that people might be cohabiting, which isn't always the case for children and young people. So we tend to use the phrase and the terminology dating and relationship violence. And we acknowledge that it can take forms of, emotional, financial, sexual, psychological and physical, among other forms. So using some of our SHRN data already, we know that, this is something that's experienced by young people, girls reporting more emotional victimization and perpetration than boys, and girls reporting more physical perpetration than boys. But boys actually reporting more physical victimization than girls. That's what our previous research has found, and it's similar to other UK and some international research as well. And we know that for those young people who experience dating and relationship violence, that there is a risk of later re-victimization and perpetration. There's a risk of poor mental and physical health outcomes, as well as engagement in risky sexual behaviours and substance use. So it gives us real impetus to, explore these behaviours and look also in terms of prevention. So what we were particularly interested in is the potential relationship between other risk behaviours, so things like alcohol use, cannabis use, experience of bullying, so victimization and perpetration, as well as cyberbullying and sexting, so sending sexually explicit images and also having a sexually explicit image sent without your consent. So what did we do to sort of explore this relationship? Well, we know that there was a sort of dearth of research in the UK looking at dating and relationship violence among young people using nationally representative samples. And we were really keen to explore in our initial work that looked at just the prevalence of dating and relationship violence among young people. So we know that adolescence is a period where young people often experiment and take part in various kind of often adult-like behaviours. And it's likely that some of these behaviours, some of these risk behaviours, including different types of dating and relationship violence, might cluster together. So this study looked at the associations between different types of dating and relationship violence, as well as risk-taking behaviours that could be connected to dating and relationship violence, to see if there's any possible groups or characteristics that might indicate a greater vulnerability to either perpetrating or being a victim of dating and relationship violence. So we looked at how risk behaviours associate with different types of dating and relationship violence. And we also looked at the associations between risk behaviours and types of dating and relationships, how they vary by gender and type of violence. So the way that we did this was using our SHRN Student Health and Wellbeing Survey, using the 2019 data, which as you know, is an online self-complete questionnaire, and the data that we used had, there was around just under 120,000 students from 198 schools, and this includes 94% of all the maintained secondary schools in Wales. So the questions are not included, the questions on dating and relationship violence, sorry, are not included in all of the survey routes, but it is in 3/4 of the routes. So we had data from around 91,000 students. We were also particularly interested in gender, so we only included those students who identified as boys and girls. And given the experience was related to dating and relationship violence, we only included those young people who reported that they had experience of dating somebody. So our final sample was around 48,000 young people. So what data did we actually use? We looked at a combination of demographic characteristics. So we looked at socioeconomic status measured by a family affluence scale. We looked at ethnicity and also household composition and also age or year group as well. We asked questions on experience of dating and relationships. So to see how many young people have experience of dating or relationships, we asked, have you ever been seeing, dating or going out with someone? And we also ask about experience of different forms of dating and relationship violence. So to explore emotional dating and relationship violence, we ask whether young people have ever been called hurtful, ever received hurtful comments from a partner, or whether they have ever given hurtful comments towards their partner. So looking at emotional victimization and also perpetration. And then to explore physical victimization or perpetration, we ask whether partners have either pushed, shoved or slapped, and then also punched, kicked or beat up their partner, or been on, the receiving end of those behaviours. So those are our questions on dating and relationships. We also have some questions on other risk behaviours. So experience of bullying victimisation. So how often have you been bullied at school? And how often have you taken part in bullying another person in the past 2 months? We also ask about cyberbullying, victimisation specifically here. Participants are asked in the last 2 months, have they ever been cyberbullied? So someone sending mean instant messages, email or text messages about you, wall postings, created a website making fun of you, posted unflattering or inappropriate pictures of you online without permission, or shared them with others. We then also ask about sexting, so asking if students have ever sent someone a sexually explicit image of themselves, or if anyone has ever sent, forwarded or shared a sexually explicit image of you to other people without asking, so without consent or permission. We also ask about alcohol consumption. So in particular here, we're interested in episodic alcohol consumption. So asking young people on the days that they drink alcohol, how many alcoholic drinks did they consume? And we also ask questions on cannabis use. So what age did they first use cannabis? And that gives us an indication as to whether people had used or had never used cannabis. So what did we, excuse me, find out? We found out that around 50% of the year 7 groups with increasing with age had actually had experience of dating. So they had either dated or seen somebody or been going out with someone. And in terms of experience of victimization, we found that emotional dating and relationship violence was the most common form reported. So from the graph here, we can see that emotional victimization was higher among girls compared to boys. But physical victimization, interestingly, was reported more among boys compared to girls. So there were some gender differences there. In terms of emotional perpetration, physical perpetration, there was a slightly higher proportion of girls reporting emotional perpetration, but very similar rates across genders there in terms of emotional and physical perpetration. In terms of the relationship between other risk behaviours and dating and relationship violence, what we found across the board was that for boys and girls alike, having bullied another person, experiencing cyberbullying, sending sexually explicit images or having an image forwarded, alcohol consumption, and having ever tried cannabis, all significantly increased the odds of experiencing and perpetrating both emotional and physical dating and relationship violence. And this was the case even when controlling for other risk behaviours and socio-demographic characteristics. So just to go into some of these figures in a little bit more detail, in terms of emotional victimisation, what we found was that boys and girls who had experienced cyberbullying, so on the receiving end of cyberbullying, were 2 times as likely to experience emotional victimization. And those who'd ever sent a sexually explicit image or had an image shared without permission were 3 times as likely to experience victimization. In terms of physical victimization, boys who experienced cyberbullying, who'd ever sent a sexually explicit image or had an image shared, also had higher odds of physical victimization. And a similar pattern for girls. So girls who'd ever reported sending sexually explicit image or having an image shared were 3 times as likely. And what we saw here was alcohol consumption. So for those who reported drinking 5 or more alcoholic drinks in one sitting, compared to those drinking less than 1 alcoholic drink, were 2 times as likely to experience physical victimization. So just some of the key points that we found there, some of the sort of slightly higher odds that we thought it was worth sharing with you. So now a focus on perpetration, so those who are perpetrating emotional and physical violence. So what we found was that for emotional perpetration, boys and girls who reported bullying somebody else were 2 times as likely to perpetrate emotional violence, as were those who reported ever sending a sexually explicit image or having an image shared without permission, were 3 times as likely to perpetrate emotional violence. And in terms of physical perpetration, we saw a relationship here with, for girls with alcoholic drink consumption. So girls reported drinking 5 or more alcoholic drinks in one sitting, compared to those drinking less than 1 alcoholic drink, had 2 times the odds of reporting physical perpetration. And for boys, again, who reported bullying others, had a higher odds of perpetrating physical dating and relationship violence than girls who also reported bullying. And the final point here was that girls who had ever sent a sexually explicit image or had an image shared without consent had higher odds of perpetrating violence than boys. So we did see some differences based on gender there, certainly for the physical perpetration. So as I say, the overall picture really was that boys and girls alike, having bullied another person, experiencing cyberbullying, sexting, alcohol consumption, and ever having tried cannabis, were significantly related to and significantly increased the odds of experiencing and perpetrating both emotional and physical dating and relationship violence. But some of the key points we've taken out here were where some of those odds were particularly high or particularly kind of consistent. So what issues do we need to consider? So in terms of interpreting the data, it isn't possible for us to kind of establish the temporal order of these risk behaviours in relation to dating and relationship violence. Some of these risk behaviours are both precursors and kind of consequences of dating and relationship violence. Alcohol consumption, intoxication can make a person more vulnerable to dating and relationship violence victimization, or it could make them more open, to aggression and thus, perpetration as well. But similarly, drinking alcohol could be a coping mechanism in response to experiencing dating and relationship violence. So it's difficult for us to sort of disentangle the temporal order of these events. The Other thing is, it's difficult for us to ascertain whether dating and relationship violence has been used as a form of self-defense. So, you know, the questions that we ask only ask specifically about behaviours, and there's a potential risk that we could be wrongly labelling victims as perpetrators here. We acknowledge that, you know, some of the descriptions that we use for emotional victimization, for example, we use, you know, have you ever been called hurtful comments? There are broader issues relating to emotional victimization that we're not necessarily asking about, which we could consider expanding. In this study in particular, we didn't look at cyberbullying perpetration. We only looked at victimization due to the data that was available to us. But that is a limitation that we don't know about cyberbullying perpetration itself. And the measure of bullying was only asked in the last couple of months. So we haven't looked at behaviours that might be you know, experienced in the past. And we acknowledge that you know, the data that we're using is students who are in school. You know, we don't have data for students who are not present in school, those who might be truanting and therefore maybe more at risk at engaging in some of these risk behaviours. So, you know, we haven't necessarily got those students captured in our surveys. But I think, you know, although these issues are really important to consider, it doesn't sort of negate the fact that this is one of the first studies, you know, to use a large UK nationally representative sample to look at risk behaviours associated with dating and relationship violence. So what are the implications? What does it mean for schools? So I suppose the main thing is the take-home message that all of these risk behaviours, bullying, victimisation and perpetration, cyberbullying, victimisation, episodic drinking, cannabis use, sexting, and having a sexually explicit image shared, you know, without consent, all of those, you know, behaviours had higher odds of, you know, reporting, experiencing and perpetrating emotional and physical dating and relationship violence. So knowing that there's a relationship between these behaviours is really important. I think some of the other things to note was, you know, that sending sexually explicit images, sending them yourself or having an image shared without your consent was one of the strongest predictors of experiencing and perpetrating emotional and physical dating and relationship violence. So yeah, I suppose the other sort of important things to consider, so over half of the Year 7 students who took part had already experienced dating, you know, they had already some dating experience, which suggests we need a more preventative approach rather than a reactive approach to tackling dating and relationship violence. And the study comes at a time when the delivery of mandatory, comprehensive, inclusive relationships and sexuality lessons as part of the revised, you know, education curriculum in Wales has got a focus on healthy relationships, and that is a real step forward. And I think this study really demonstrates that holistic approach to supporting positive relationships and sort of healthy school environments to tackle dating and relationship violence is really important, given how interrelated these behaviours seem to be. And there's potential that by tackling one, we might be tackling multiple of these behaviours. So yeah, a holistic approach to supporting positive relationships and healthy school environments to tackle DRV, as well as these other interrelated risk factors, is really important and a really positive step forward that is hopefully encompassed in the new curriculum reform. So thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to take them. Thanks very much.